Good evening to you, viewer. We are grateful that you are watching Church of Uganda Family TV this particular hour. This is Family Hour, Monday to Friday, 9 p.m., immediately after news at 8. And this is our Thursday edition where we discuss leadership and governance. Edwin Austin Mukalazi is my name. We are looking at crisis management today in leadership. Why is it important that a leader should have a crisis management plan? How does this plan look like? I mean, what are some of the traits of crisis? What is even, what can we call crisis in leadership? In that organization, what should you consider crisis? Because probably you might think that each time you find a stumble somewhere, then a crisis has shown up. But by the end of this show, at least we shall be able to differentiate, to understand well what a crisis is and how to manage the crisis as a leader. We are delighted to have Dr. Patricia here with us. Doctor, it's a pleasure having you this evening.
Good evening, Adrian, and good evening, viewers out there. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation, especially on this interesting topic on crisis, because life today seems to be like a crisis every day. Yes, because every day is like an exam with so many questions to answer, and so many issues to deal with and tackle. And I believe all leaders out there are feeling the same. So we deal with crisis every other time.
In other words, we can't say that there is a time you will find a soft landing in life.
Yes, and when you come out victorious, that's when what propels you even higher. But by God's grace, we sail above the tide and we thank God for each day.
Wow,
Yes.
wow. Doctor, I want to understand this crisis and what the term crisis really means in an organizational perspective.
Crisis, I would say, is an unexpected event or happening to threatening to disrupt the normal operations of an institution or an organization or setup. And it is anything that threatens an organization's reputation, finances from the existence. It can threaten the manpower or the teams within the organization. It is a threatening experience. And it can be even like a fire. It can be like a strike or demonstration. It can happen when people begin resigning and there's a high turnover of staff. That is a crisis, because now it creates a gap in the organization that requires to be addressed. So it is that unexpected event that threatens to disrupt the normalcy within an institution or organization. Yes.
Okay.
And when we talk about crisis management, it is now the process of dealing with that crisis, where we have to do the problem identification, identify what is the problem, develop a response, and execute a plan. Like you recall, we had a situation of COVID in the country.
Yeah.
There was a plan to deal with it. His Excellency the President had to sit with his teams and hatch a plan, and then they communicated the plan, they developed a response and the solutions, and then communicated to citizens, said, citizens, we're having a situation in the country of this COVID, and the medicine for it is lockdown, and make sure you keep yourselves clean, wash your hands, wear masks, standard operation procedures. So in every crisis, we need that kind of standard operation procedures to deal with it. And crisis management sometimes is considered reactive. Some leaders just react. But crisis leadership, on the other hand, calls for proactiveness. Proactiveness, where you even think beforehand and have like a mechanism of early warning. It's about how organizations prepare for a crisis through the early warning mechanisms. You know that sometime next year we might have weather changes in weather patterns. There's going to be a prolonged drought. How do we prepare the citizens to deal with that situation? And crisis leadership is basically about exploring the likely scenarios and then developing communication and response mechanism keeping the people under you in touch on what is happening. So that calls for smartness. Crisis leaders need to be able to think strategically, think out of the box, and make decisions quickly to minimize the impact. So I think that is very, very important. So it is about how a leader responds to a situation which is called that crisis, and their leadership styles normally is what sets the tone for organization. When a leader gets panicky and wants to run away, then everybody goes into disarray. Think about a plane which is experiencing turbulence. How the pilot, the captain, and the passers and the cabin crew deal with the situation. They don't just alarm passengers and say there is a crisis. No. There is a turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts. So a leader is expected to communicate to his teams that, there is a situation here. We have these methods, these approaches or strategies we are going to use to deal with it. So keep yourselves abreast. We're having financial challenges in the organization. Salaries may be delayed. Management is working out a plan to mitigate the situation. Keep yourselves abreast. But if leaders go into panic mode and become very emotional, and employees are likely to also begin doing the same, then what organizations will we have? It is very important for a leader to remain strategic, to remain composed, and face the crisis. Yes.
Wow. Among the things you talked about, you reminded me of how the president strategically handled COVID-19.
Yes.
And that was a time, I think, all the people, including those in the opposition, paid attention to what he was saying. So he first gives you the preamble, the problem, and then the statement is therefore. So that was when everyone was now waiting.
We had a crisis of HIV/AIDS in this country some time back, and the same strategy was used. And by then, Uganda was ranked among the best in fighting HIV/AIDS in Africa because of that strategy. We embraced the problem. We accepted that yes, there is a problem.
The problem is here.
What are the solutions to the problem? We started saying solutions are A, B, C, D. The solutions were communicated. Ugandans embraced. The Ministry of Health swung into action, and we managed to minimize the problem in the country.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that preamble on crisis and crisis management. But now, still talking about crisis management. What are some of the traits of, skills and traits of an effective, should I say, effective crisis management leader?
First of all, when we look at crisis in leadership, the leader who is effective in crisis management should be able to minimize the negative effects of that crisis on the people he's leading. Because, and you see, time is of essence. A leader should be able to swing into action quickly in order to minimize the effects of the crisis on the people he is leading. Time is of essence. You don't want to be unresponsive, or even if it appears that way. So as a leader, you must be able to swing into action, because crisis leadership is about responding to situations of crisis with meaningful initiatives to minimize the impact. It's about responding the right way, not just ignoring the crisis. And great leaders begin by assessing the situation. You remember King Nehemiah?
Yeah.
Nehemiah went to examine the walls of Jerusalem. He assessed the situation and looked at the weak areas, places which had gaps, places which are open and prone to attacks by the enemy, and he looked at them and came up with solutions. So a leader should be able to examine the situation, then create a response, secure the resources needed, communicate the plan, and quickly get to work. But we have leaders out there who sit and keep postponing and procrastinating. I'll handle this next week. No, we'll give it attention next month. No, let's wait for the next quarter.
Let me think
and
about it.
And before you know it, a problem has become a different thing altogether. Then a leader should be able to protect his employees. Even when we come up with solutions, we should have empathy. Think about the implications of our decisions on the employees. If I'm making a management decision, is it for the good of the institution? And then what impact does it have on the employee who serves in the institution? And the leader also avoids the next crisis. How do we do this? Early warning. You saw the outbreaks of fire.
Yeah.
People these days buy fire extinguishers.
Exactly.
Early warning. You buy a fire extinguisher not because you have seen a fire, but because you anticipate that it's most likely going to happen. That is why in organizations we have the human resource manuals, we have the training plans, we have policies in order to help in management of crisis. Because crisis management is an important quality, especially in large organizations where there are certain risks involved, work-related risks. But the goal is to prevent risks from happening. The goal is to prevent the actual crisis from happening. Like for the fire extinguisher, the goal is to prevent fires, not just for putting them off. We are having them there to prevent any occurrences. Then leaders who invest in crisis leadership and preparations are normally leaders who are preparing to have a bright future for the institutional organization. Because remember, even leadership and growth in leadership, it's about being able to sail through challenges victoriously. A leader who doesn't go through crisis is not grounded properly as a leader. Because if you're able to deal with a crisis, small or big as it is, it makes one person a better leader. So when you look at leading in crisis, there are certain key skills and traits a leader must present with. When a crisis hits, leaders must quickly arise and assess the situation, like the example of Nehemiah I gave. They must be able to evaluate the options available and respond to it, not to avoid it. They must understand the value of communication and logistics. Are you able to communicate, or you're going to keep silent about it? For instance, if you're having a financial challenge and you're not able to pay your workers in time and you keep quiet, the workers can strike. But if you communicate and tell them, you give them hope, a message of hope, and tell them what management is doing to ensure that that situation is sorted. They must understand the value of communication as leaders. They must also adopt to their plans as events change. Certain times you make plans, but situations keep changing. Situations keep changing as things evolve over time. So a leader should be able to at least deal with those issues, minimize the negative effect, protect the employees, avoid the next crisis from happening, and be able to manage leadership in crisis. So when you have those key skills and traits you need as a leader, then you will be able to sail through. Now, when you look at the traits again, a leader must be able to remain calm. Because if a crisis happens and I'm appearing panicky, my hair is all over the place, you will get pressure and attack. Stay calm under pressure. When you have a team with a variety of thinking preferences, you can leverage from your team. Share the problem with your team and say, we're having a situation like this. There is an attack on the organization. How can we deal strategically with this attack and be able to clear or clean the image of the institution? Then people will be like think tanks. They'll give ideas and say, no, let's issue a rebuttal. No, let's go to court. No, let's consult further. No, let's provide information with clarity and specificity to the citizens. Great leaders normally act quickly without acting rashly. So
what's the difference?
Acting quickly without acting rashly, you don't bring in emotions, but you make sure you act and take a decision. Then you need to think on your feet. How do you think on your feet? As an important skill, you have to think on your feet, because often when you go through situations, a leader should be able to identify the most pressing issues and prioritize the most pressing issues. Because you could have so many challenges in the organization, but what is that one which is the most pressing? Be able to think on your feet at all times, and also be able to delegate tasks and responsibilities, because there is no leader on this planet Earth who has a solution for everything. It's important to delegate and train and equip the other workers so that they are able to help you deal with the crisis. Because that's an important skill. In crisis leadership, you will allow the other leaders, the other young upcoming leaders you're grooming and mentoring, to help you manage the workload. Have you found a leader with so many files on his table? Micromanagement doesn't want to delegate work, but it is important to delegate as a way of training the managers, as a way of helping them to be able to help you solve the problems. Then another skill is effective communication. Effective communication. Communicate effectively. Let people know, because crisis management is a collective effort. If they know, they'll give you ideas, they'll give you ways or means or mechanisms on how to deal with a crisis. Because crisis management is a collective effort, and everyone needs to understand the goal and their role in achieving the goals, especially during a crisis. Like, for instance, when we had COVID, the essential institutions which had to continue operating, they had to continue working. So, and accurate information was provided in a timely manner, and there were updates on what was happening, how many people in terms of statistics have been got to the problem, and so on. So all this communication is important to address the situation. First of all, let the people know the magnitude of the crisis. Let them know the impact of the crisis, and let them know how important it is to mitigate the crisis and get out of the crisis. Then we need to remain flexible. We need to remain as flexible and adaptable as possible. Leadership during crisis is usually a series of important decisions which require to be taken. And your decisions can change depending on the conditions which may have shifted or changed also. Yes, so a leader should be able to make decisions depending on the conditions at hand. Most important is the decision. It's important to make a decision than not making a decision at all. As a fundamental skill during a crisis, a leader must be able to make decisions. You know, prudence and care are very important in decision making, but crisis elevates the need for action as well. There are decisions like sometimes you have to lay off staff. Yes, in order to help an institution or organization to stand. Like you have heard, government is now doing the rationalization. They're merging some ministries, departments, and agencies. Others are going to be scrapped off, and people are going to lose their jobs. And it is a difficult situation, but a decision has to be taken. But how do you get to then deal with the emotions of the people who are affected? How do you then get to counsel people? How do you then get down to help them understand the need for helping this institution or this country or government stand firm? Crisis elevates the need for action. So we should always be mindful about that. Yes.
Well, still talking about crisis, of course we've looked at these traits and skills, but why is it really important to have, before you even get into the crisis management plan, why is it important to have this plan before we get into how to develop it?
I think it's important to have this plan because it helps you or the organization get out of the danger.
Okay.
Yes, get out of the danger. And then it's also a long-term strategic vision that helps leaders to respond or prevent the crisis. So you have to have that long-term strategic vision, which will help you as a leader to navigate through and get out of the crisis. And it's a mechanism of early warning to prevent future occurrences of the crisis. So I think it's important to develop a thoughtful crisis management plan as a leader, to identify the potential crisis scenarios and consider internal causes or events or natural disasters, or even if it is resource constraints, but we need to prioritize the risk of each potential crisis. So you identify the potential crisis, and then you identify the risks related to that crisis and have that risk management plan in place. That is the reason why it's important for us to have like a contingency, a response plan. In case this happened, how do we respond as an institution? In case this happened, how do we respond as government of Uganda? In case this happens to my family, how do we respond as the Okirias? So that is like a contingency plan. It's a detailed description of what steps you will take to prevent, to respond to, and even manage the crisis effectively. And then secondly, it's important to create response and recovery strategy. Do you have a response and recovery strategy? Response to deal with the crisis. What about recovery? Pulling through. The crisis has happened. But how do you help people to get over what they went through? The impact of, for instance, COVID-19. Where we now had the Zoom sessions, Zoom meetings to minimize costs and what. People have to adopt, have a mindset and change and pull out of that situation. Response strategies normally mitigate the impact of the crisis, while the recovery helps people to recover, to restore the operations and return to normalcy as quick as possible. So it's important, first of all, to engage with the stakeholders, engage with the workers, the employees, inform them, and then also implement the communication protocols. Do you have the communication policies? Before any crisis hits, evaluate the existence of your own communication strategy within the institution. Have clear roles and responsibilities for the managers, for the supervisors, for the different teams. And then test your crisis management plan. It's good to have a document, but have you tested it? Just like you have a law or policy in place, but has it been tested before? Regularly, it's important to review that conflict management plan to make sure your scenarios are still relevant, are still up to date, and then reflect on the modern conditions. Are there certain changes that have occurred? Just like the laws, some provisions get expunged because they have become archaic and they are no longer applicable to the situation. For instance, if we are dealing with cyber security, it may need upgrading because, like I've said, corruption, let's look at corruption as a crisis now, keeps changing faces like an amoeba. It keeps evolving. And the corruption keeps getting intricate every other time. So we need to keep upgrading our laws. Like we are now amending the Anti-Corruption Act as well to make some penalties a little harsher. Sometimes there's a legal crisis management change because of the new trends. It calls for review of the existing laws and putting in place new mechanisms to deal with the crisis or situation. Then make sure your workforce is familiar with a crisis management plan. One thing is to have a crisis management plan, but do the employees or the workforce know about the provisions in the crisis management plan? Especially, for instance, if you're going to hire new people. If you just alarm them with this action, then the existing employees will reject the new people you have brought on board. So I think it is very, very important for us to go that way. Have at least a plan in place and implement that plan, but communicate the strategies so that everybody else gets to know what it is you're doing and the benefits of moving in that direction.
Okay.
Yes.
Doctor, we are taking a short commercial break. When we return, we are going to continue with more talks, especially on crisis management in leadership. Stay with us.